My favorite Dungeons & Dragons campaigns are the ones where the players are driving the story forward, where their choices, their struggles, and the consequences of their actions define the narrative.
Dungeons & Dragons will be a more rewarding experience for both the Dungeon Master and the players when you make the character stories the center of attention for driving the narrative. And this happens best when the Dungeon Master makes things personal.
My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. And today we're going to talk about how to engage your players like never before by using personal quests.
Now, before we get into defining personal quests, there's a lot of aspects of D&D that can be a little clunky and get in the way of a fluid narrative and storytelling medium.
If you're like us and you love 5th edition, but sometimes you just want to strip it down to the bare essentials, you may want to check out Nimble, the sponsor for this week's episode, and a rules-light set of variants for 5th edition that focus on the action so that the story stays front and center.
In a simple 20-page booklet, Nimble offers the ability to mod your game of D&D to improve upon some of the basic functions, making initiative, spellcasting, armor class, and even attacks much more simplified, streamlined, and faster at the table.
Nimble's set of lightweight variant rules really maximize DM flexibility, player choice, and really get away from all those things that make the game more tedious or slow.
It's fully compatible with all of the 5th edition supplements, and you can check it out right now by following the links down below.
Thanks to Nimble for sponsoring this episode, and be sure to check out their Kickstarter and follow links below to download their demo rulebook.
Now, let's talk about personal quests.
So personal quests were a mechanic that we introduced for the player characters to choose from in our book, Dungeons of Drakkenheim, and it's been a system that I've been using in my campaign for a very, very long time now to great success. It's something that we do during Session 0, where I, as the Game Master, get together with my players and decide on an individual objective for everybody's player character to have, which is over and above, say, coming up with a backstory, personality traits, ideals, bonds, or flaws.
A personal quest zeroes in on something specific. A lot of times player characters will spend a few hours designing a backstory. But a backstory, even when you're coming up with your ideals, bonds, flaws, and personality traits, usually tie into the history of your character. But the thing that's kind of missed in that aspect is that they're about to go on a new, exciting adventure. And so taking a personal quest and tying it to the narrative of the adventure that they're about to go on helps drive them towards the story that's being told.
Now, to incentivize my players to sweeten the pot a little bit, as it would be, to come up with a really good and compelling personal quest, I offer a reward to all of my players when they complete their personal quest in the form of an ability score improvement or a feat. This also helps us focus on the fact that a personal quest is really meant to be what I would call an intermediate goal. It is something that the player characters can achieve early-ish in the campaign rather than something that is tied to the end of the campaign in total. It's possible for a player to come up with a personal quest that does involve the final conclusion of the campaign, but that's where I like to break it into manageable and achievable chunks. Thus, a personal quest is something that an individual player character can accomplish on their own over the course of the campaign, gain a reward for completing it, and have that really nice spotlight time on their player and on the player and their character as the party works together to help them with one of their own individual goals.
This also sets a secondary objective for the party as a whole. Often the party will work together and they're probably fighting some evil in the world that they need to conquer. But along the way, the elements that they're going to engage with will bring each of them to make some important choices and decisions and choose paths that lead them towards their personal goal.
Now, making a really good personal quest and integrating that into your campaign is a challenge that begins at Session 0 and is going to have an echoing effect on your entire adventure design. But it doesn't mean that you have to upend your entire plans and change everything about your campaign in order to build in a personal quest that your player characters have come up with.
The personal quests of the players could be interwoven with each other, or they could interact with the different themes and locations or even the villains of the campaign setting.
The easiest way to start making a personal quest with one of your players is simply ask them to come up with one. What is the thing that your character wants to achieve? But the thing that you really have to do with many players is ask them to be specific. You should know when you've completed your personal quest. It should be very obvious when you finished it. So a very nebulous and big idea oftentimes might not be appropriate for a personal quest. So it needs to have a certain measure of specific accomplishment to it. It makes it a clear goal that's obvious.
I also think that this is a case where the player and the dungeon master are going to want to work together in a back and forth manner. The player might come up with a nebulous, large personal quest, such as, I think my character wants revenge on somebody, but I'm not sure who that is. This is the perfect time for the dungeon master to look at the campaign and maybe choose a prominent evil NPC who might present themselves in Act 3 of Chapter 4 of the campaign arc, and that is the person that your player character has been searching for this whole time. By working with your players, having them explain what they want out of the personal quest, and then finding the right connective tissue to hammer it into the campaign as a whole is really going to make this sing.
And as a DM, you actually have two really interesting levers that you can pull with your personal quests. Personal quests can help support your plot hooks, and they help involve your player characters and draw them towards certain objectives in the campaign. Perhaps one of the player characters is looking for revenge. They're looking for the legendary six-fingered man. And an NPC offers your players a mission in exchange for information on the location on the six-fingered man. It's a great way to draw your player into the overall plot while giving them something that they want in the process that's more than just magic, treasure, or coins.
You can also use personal quests in the opposite way, and rather than making them tack on to an obvious part of the campaign, you actually contradict the player's personal quest by making something that is going to cause a difficult choice at the table. Perhaps the six-fingered man is found in Act 3 of the campaign, but is essential for completing a certain quest or mission that they're on. Now it's up to the player to decide, do they get their revenge and kill the six-fingered man, or let them live in order to complete their main goal?
It also can create the opening for character development and for a player to evolve as they face the choices that they have to make and decide what they really wanted to. So I personally would say if the player confronts the six-fingered man and realizes that they want to go on the path of redemption and forgiveness, and they decided to forgive the six-fingered man instead of killing them, I would count that as completing their personal quest.
Completing doesn't need to look the same way it's presented on paper at the beginning. Just because your players are gung-ho about a certain idea at the outset of the campaign doesn't mean that that's the only idea. This is the beautiful thing about character evolution and growth.
So let's look at a couple different examples for really good personal quests that work. Because there's a lot of things that players almost immediately go for when considering a personal quest. Revenge and a missing person usually are the first two that they think of. And what can be a little bit challenging with both of those is that sometimes a personal quest comes in with an awkward time pressure or wants to draw the party away from the main plot. So we're going to suggest a couple ideas for personal quests that are achievable, but that aren't necessarily going to make the entire story about the campaign about this player character.
One great personal quest to offer your players is discovering a secret. Perhaps they're on the quest of knowledge. There could be a mystery passed down to them or a secret riddle that they've never been able to solve. Some sort of secret that they're on a quest to find the answer to.
Yeah, perhaps the secret can be as simple as their own origin, or finding out what happened to a long-lost scholar or sage. Perhaps it can be finding out who really is the power behind the throne, or even learning something arcane or eldritch in nature. Maybe even the secrets of divinity itself are something that they are questing for. Their goals can be anything from the very ambitious, the esoteric, and the philosophical, to the very nose on the ground, like, who is the secret master of the Thieves Guild? And then the question with their personal quest is, once they discover that secret, how does that change them, and what do they do with that knowledge?
My big secret is, what does the J stand for in Homer J. Simpson?
related to discovering a secret, but perhaps a little more specialized, is that of researching new magic. I love this personal quest because it turns out the player's handbook is actually filled with a whole bunch of personal quests. It could very well be that your player character, their personal quest, is to achieve immortality by learning the clone spell.
It could be that in your setting, the wish spell is extremely hard to come by, but there is a known book out there that can teach you the wish spell. Well, learning that arcane knowledge and being the first wizard in 100 years to gain access to wish might be the personal quest of your player.
You could also take this even further into the gotta catch 'em all archetype and say that a wizard's character, their personal quest is to learn every single spell that a wizard can learn. It's a great personal quest because they're always going to be searching for more knowledge. And this is an example of one of those personal quests which a character can complete in little bits and pieces and feel like they're making progress to an overall goal rather than one that is gigantic and all-consuming.
This also is a great way that if everybody's getting cool magic items and things of that nature, your wizard can still get a few, but the fact that you can just drop loot in that is a spell book with some of the more niche spells, and they're still like, yes, my personal quest.
Now, this is also related, as you mentioned, to the magic item, is find the lost relic magic item or build one. And you got a couple different variants of this because you could have the classic, my family vault is missing its key and I need to find the key to my family vault, or find the long lost heirloom of my household. But you can find more variants to this.
It could be that the family heirloom is a broken blade and you need to find 3 items or a world-renowned secret blacksmith who can repair the item. You could also go with the classic legend of a known weapon of great power. Perhaps it's a sword wedged in a stone, or in the great broken ruins of a castle or temple of ancient lore lies a staff that's said to hold great power, but it's protected by a dangerous monster. These sorts of great items are really great for a player character to be like, well, I'm going to quest on finding that mythical item.
Taking things to the more mundane, but still giving an objective that can be progressive in this interesting way, is the classic, I'm in deep, deep debt to some very mean people.
You borrowed from the Thieves Guild and now you're 10,000 gold in debt, and you never wanted to be an adventurer, but you had to do it because, oh boy, there's no better way to get that money.
Yeah, I love the pay off a debt personal quest. It's really, really easy. It worked for Han Solo. So it will work for almost any kind of roguish player character archetype. And personally, if I have a player in my group that is having a really hard time deciding on a personal quest, the debt is the default for me. It's you owe somebody 10,000 gold pieces. Why? It doesn't even necessarily need to be criminal. Maybe your wizard has to pay off their loans from wizard school.
Or maybe you just put a down payment on your new water-deep waterfront housing, but you're going to have to pay off that mortgage.
Yeah, the payoff of the debt thing is surprisingly flexible because another way that you can modify it is to make it not about money. Maybe another player character saved your character's life and you owe them a life debt. Maybe the debt that you have to pay off is to your warlock patron who you owe 99 souls to. Maybe the debt is to your family and it is more about proving yourself in a certain way or achieving that sort of coming of age ritual. There's a lot of different subtle modifications to this, so it doesn't necessarily have to be about money.
This one is similar to the finding a great magic item or weapon, but instead they might be searching for a great and powerful person. There might be a lot of very powerful NPCs who can bestow their knowledge upon the player characters. A great example of this, one of my favorites, is in Avatar: The Last Airbender, Sokka, who isn't a bender himself, but if you watch the show, he becomes a master of all weapon options because as he travels from city to city, he finds the greatest teacher of whatever weapon or skills that they perform in that city, and he learns and trains from them.
You know, another way to build on that is instead of it necessarily being find out specific people, did you ever play Earthbound?
Yes.
And you had to visit the places of power to unlock more of your own abilities? That could be a fun variant to it. The other kind of find the mentor or thing, you can always do the Yoda story, right? Find Yoda, seek them out, learn the knowledge from them. But you could also be in search of another hero to achieve an objective. And the fun reversal could be is that you were the hero you were looking for all along, right? So there can be a couple different variants to this find a specific person sort of thing. And what's really interesting about that is that all of these can then feed back into the main quest line or main storyline, because these NPCs can be useful allies in the story. These places, these magic items, all these things can build on top of one another. And it's really easy to inject all of these things into the adventure sites and locations that your characters are exploring. But putting them in a slightly out of the way area, or putting them in a place where, oh yeah, we're going to that great city anyways, but we have to find the master. Or we're going to the mountains because we're going to explore the dungeon of the dwarves, but we know that old master lives on the mountaintop. So that's going to take us in a different direction. It's going to, we're going to have to make some interesting choices, but it's also kind of in the area as well.
Another simple one is that if you are playing in a campaign that has different factions or groups or organizations, you might have a simple personal quest of either earning a title, joining one of the factions, or if you want to flip that on its side, killing or destroying one of the factions. Or you could mix them together and say, kill the leader of a faction and become the new leader of that faction.
Love all of these. Anything that involves rising in rank or title. Of course, you could be the long-lost heir to a throne or a barony or some sort of organization, and you need to prove your claim. Proving your claim to the throne is one of the personal quests from Dungeons of Drakkenheim, in fact. And so all of these can be combined together, recombined in different ways. And you could also build on top of those literal building, in that maybe your personal quest is to build a fortress or a ship or a business or recruit a crew. And all of those things can feed into the main campaign, or they can be a personal quest as well.
Another great one that's pretty easy for both the DM and the players to link together is slaying a great and terrible monster. This one's pretty easy. If the player's like, I want to kill the biggest monster, then the dungeon master just gets to look at the campaign, find which of the monsters is the biggest, or they can add rumors in, like, you're going near the dragon's den in Act 2 or 3. Well, that dragon is one of the most ferocious beasts in the area.
But you could also expand this and say it's not just one monster. Maybe your character's personal quest is to defeat one of each of the types of chromatic dragons. Or, again, you can combine this as well with the magic item quest, in that your character needs to seek out some magical monsters to get an ingredient from each of those monsters. And maybe some of them you have to kill, some of them you have to befriend, some of them you have to trick, some of them you have to do different things to engage with in different ways. So slaying a monster can be part of almost any personal quest, not just the objective itself.
When we talk about slaying a monster, it could also be a prominent person, and this kind of ties back into something we were mentioning earlier, which is the revenge plotline. Now, the revenge plotline is often the go-to, and you want to make sure that if you are going to do a revenge plotline, that it is going to work in your campaign. The player character needs to be open to the idea that the revenge could have complications and interesting interactions with the campaign setting, because I personally think that makes it the most interesting.
I have a rule. Only one player in the group can have a revenge story. You get one. And that way, it's up to the players to negotiate who gets it. I really do think that players should discuss their personal quests with each other. And I just say, one person can have a revenge plotline, but that's it. By a similar token, the other one that's very common, but also very challenging, is the missing loved one, or rescuing the missing loved one. The first reason why this is challenging is that it almost always inherently comes with some sort of time pressure, meaning that rescuing the loved one becomes the thing the party has to do right away.
The other hard part that I have with the rescuing a loved one is, as a DM who's telling the story, when my player says, I want to rescue a loved one, my first thought is, well, the loved one is now one of the villains. But sometimes the player character had a very different idea and is extremely disappointed when they find out that their loved one is one of the villains near the end of the campaign and the rest of the party now wants to kill them. That might not pay off the way you wanted it to. So you need to be very specific with the player on what they want out of rescuing a loved one. Are they okay with the fact that their loved one could be dead, could be converted, could be mind controlled, could be anything? What are they okay with?
Yeah, like you can. One of the classic examples that you see in a lot of D&D campaigns and published ones is the loved one wandered off into the dangerous environment and was never seen again. And when I have a player that brings that to me as their personal quest, I ask them straight up, do you want to find your loved one dead or alive? Because that changes the quest. And I think that for a player that wants this personal quest, depending on who they are, you might want to get that expectation set very early on. And one of the things that I often push back against players that have the rescue a loved one personal quest is trying to find an explanation that doesn't put that loved one in immediate mortal danger. So one of the ways that you can get around this is that the loved one has been captured and is being held for ransom, which actually turns it into the repay off a debt personal quest. But at least that way you know that the player through inaction is not going to automatically fail their personal quest. And I think that that's the biggest question you have to answer with this one is, can that player just fail their personal quest by taking too long to achieve it? And personally, the answer to that should almost always be no. The player should be able to achieve the personal quests at whatever pace the campaign needs it to be.
It's also important with the rescuing a loved one that they're not in a no leads situation. If at the start of the campaign there's nothing to drive them on their personal quest, then it's hard to really have them buy into it.
Yeah, they got to have a clue.
I think that like the obvious thing is the reason why they're going on the quest in the first place. In our example, if you do have a missing loved one who went missing in Drakenheim, well, first of all, Drakenheim's a terrible city and they're probably dead. But they were last seen around Drakenheim. They passed through Emberwood Village and were heading to the city.
Yeah.
In which case, you are following that lead. So start with a lead. They were last seen or they were rumored to have been spotted X, Y, or Z. That way, the character starts by following that lead.
I think another one that's a really good way to do the I got lost in a dangerous environment is look at some of the, what if the player character received a sending spell from their loved one and their loved one said in 25 words, I'm lost here. I don't think I'm going to make it, but you have to avenge me and finish the work that I started. So I'm thinking of the story of Subnautica Below Zero has this sort of thing where the inciting incident for that game is the loved one went missing and they're dead. And so it becomes more about finding out why did that happen and then completing the work that they set out to start. So I think that it's a very important thing to discuss with a player who comes to you with the missing loved one in a dangerous environment personal quest, to get it out of the way early, what the fate is going to be and what's on the table, because I have seen a couple implementations of this personal quest where the loved one was dead and the player character wasn't expecting that, and they were really upset with me when that was what happened because they were expecting to save their loved one, and I hadn't done a good enough job managing that expectation because what they presented me with was a situation where there was no way that person was alive anymore.
I also think you just presented the sending stone to grab the character, and the first thing that popped into my head was the opening arc of A Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, where regular everyday farmer boy Link wakes up in bed because Zelda telepathically is like, come to the castle and help. And he's like, okay.
The dream spell can also work for this. And that's a great way to get the characters involved in that whole way. Of course, it can always be a letter that was mailed, right? Another fun way to do this is that maybe the loved one isn't dead, but has joined the evil organization.
And they need to get brought out.
Yes.
Removed.
Yeah, removed from the evil organization.
You could also have a Saving Private Ryan situation where it's like a good friend, but they are all soldiers who were part of a faction who went into the dangerous area. And now they might be one of the last of their family left, and you need to get them home.
Yes, but it needs to be very clear that they're a prisoner and that they're not going to be executed imminently, that they're being kept as a prisoner for some reason. Those are all ways to address it so that you have a little bit more structure to work with instead of just this very nebulous scenario, which both the revenge plot and the missing loved one can get really nebulous. And hopefully these give you a few things to latch onto if your players do that. Again, I go with the rule, 1 revenge plot, 1 missing loved one per party. That's the limit.
So with all of these ideas, I think the important closing statement, just to reiterate, is that the goal with a personal quest is that the player character presents a concept, an idea, be as specific as they can. But no matter how specific the player is in presenting their personal quest, they also need to be open to the fact that the DM then needs to take that, negotiate with them, and say, hey, if we twist these few knobs a little bit, I can really ingrain this into the actual campaign we're going to be playing. Perhaps the player character names an NPC and the dungeon master says, actually, could they be named this? Because then it's already part of the campaign. Oh, you wanted to kill a dragon, but instead if it was a beholder, I can really make that work.
Yeah.
These fine little touches and having the DM know the campaign setting and be able to just tack on exactly what they need to really make that personal quest feel like it's going to drive that player character to really experience the campaign in a more engaged way, that's where you're going to get really good D&D.
You really do. We have a ton of fun at our tables, but our personal quests have allowed us to explore more than just fun. I feel like we've been able to explore themes of family, trauma. We've had tears shed at the table, which is an amazing experience. And the wonderful thing about personal quests is that when you have that conversation at the outset of the campaign during session 0, these are all levers you can pull. If you want to have the personal quest that is, I just want to eat all the candy from Candyland, that's great. If you want to have the personal quest that's going to have everyone bawling your eyes out because it's dealing with the real stuff involving family and trauma and missing people and unresolved regret and unrequited love and heirs to the throne and political intrigue and missing people and revenge, you can have that. But by having the conversation and laying the framework for it, you can make it something really special and engaging.
So if you've used personal quests in your game, tell us about some of the great ones that you've come up with in the comments below.
The videos that we make on our channel are made possible with the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we create here on YouTube, please consider becoming a patron of our show so that you can get on our patron-exclusive Discord community right down below.
And if you want to support our work, you can give us a super thanks in the comments below. And if you want to see us using some of these personal quests to really drive the narrative of our own campaign, you can check that out in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more advice for Dungeon Masters on engaging your players right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.